Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Breaking the Game podcast. Thanks for listening in. I'm one of your co-hosts, Austin Carr. And of course, with me as always is Stephen Gillespie. How you doing today, Stephen?
Man, I'm doing awesome. It's another day where we have a full day of NBA games, so can't complain. I'm just ready to talk some basketball with you, Austin.
Sounds good. Me too. I think we've got a pretty exciting show. We're pretty much just diving deep into these playoff games that we've had so far. A lot of good games. Definitely some surprises from my point of view. I don't know what you think about them so far, but
I mean, obviously, when you have the number one seed and both conferences lose,
mhm.
they're kind of opening. They're kind of opening game in the series. It's a little bit shocking, and
Mhm.
just to call back to an earlier episode we did together. I told you if one of the teams were going to lose a game, it's going to be Milwaukee.
Yeah, you did, and I didn't really see that coming, but we've seen this before from Budenholzer teams. When he was with Atlanta, they had number one seed, and they just kind of underwhelmed. And I don't really know what it is, but I think we'll get into that here in a little bit. So,
Yeah, and not to pat myself on the back too hard, but right now it's like a 3 point game. Last I looked
hmm
on the Brooklyn and
yeah, I think the
Toronto
Raptors
game.
Raptors are up six now. I think
Yeah, they close game all the way through,
we've had a
and the
lot of good
Raptor.
games.
Yeah, the Raptors were behind most of this game, but
hmm
we're not going to talk about this game for this episode today, though,
Right?
are we, Austin?
Nope, we're just doing yesterday and Monday, right?
Yep.
Cool. Well, the first game of the playoffs was Monday at 1:30 Eastern time, so some afternoon basketball, which was always fun. It was Denver and Utah. Denver got the win in overtime. 135 to 125. Donovan Mitchell obviously went off 57 points. For me, I think the big story was Jamal Murray in the fourth quarter and overtime. Just he took over. Kind of really showed that I think he's going to eventually be, if he's not already, kind of the alpha dog of that team. I know Jokic is probably their star player, but I just feel like Murray is going to be the guy that makes them go. And as far as he takes them, that's how far they're going to go, I think, at least in these playoffs.
Yeah, and this is just kind of conventional Denver Utah game, nip
Mm-hmm.
tuck most of the way through, and in the regular season, we kind of previewed this game earlier in another episode, and
Mm-hmm.
they had one regular season game go to overtime, and the other ones were all within double digits. So this is what we typically see, and what's weird is that Utah was playing without. Hey, what's going on there, Dre? Appreciate you tuning in, brother. But yeah, Utah was playing without Conley, who went to go and see the birth of his child. So
Mm-hmm.
congratulations to him, and rightfully so. That's what you should be doing.
Right.
And obviously without Bogdanovich, and then on the Nuggets end, they were without Will Barton and Neal still. So
Mm-hmm.
both dealing with a little bit of injury loss, and
Yeah,
it was
both
a
teams
close
were
game.
a little bit shorthanded, but you never would have known it if you were watching. They both teams played really well. Um, I just think Denver's depth it just kind of wore them down over the course of the game. They just got so many guys they can throw out there that can get the job done on offense. Um, Sorry, one sec.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Like Donovan Mitchell, what more can you do? If you got to be thinking that if you're him, 57 points, the third most all time for a 23-year-old in the playoffs, and they still couldn't get a win. And that's got to be a hard realization to come to. It's like, what more do I have to do? And I just think he needs to get some help from somewhere. I don't know necessarily where it's going to come scoring wise. They don't have a whole lot of creators on their offense other than him, so it's kind of hard for them to initiate offense when it's not going through him.
Yeah, you're right. And I think losing Conley and Bogdanovich, those were kind of your other creators.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of lean a little bit more towards Joe Ingles out of that second unit, being
Mm-hmm.
able to create some baskets on the pick and roll. Rudy Gobert, he's a fine defensive player. And I think this game, you see how talented of a defender he is, right? But
Right.
offensively, he's just not the guy that you can rely on to
Mm-hmm.
be that second scorer. And that's really what I kind of liken Mitchell's performance to what we see Damian Lillard do night in and night out. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's 57 points you mentioned. He was one of only three players, and being 23 years old in the playoffs to score that many points. He was behind Elgin Baylor and Michael Jordan. That's obviously great company
Right.
to be in, right? And just look at the way that the game broke down. Denver led Utah in 3 of the 4 quarters of the regulation. Utah outscored the Nuggets 31-19 in the third quarter. And if you take a deep dive into that quarter, you started seeing the potential that, hey, this game may go into overtime. So, Coach Malone was looking at how he could kind of keep his shorthanded rotation ready for the game. Quinn Snyder couldn't be in that position with how much they were behind. So that third quarter, you started seeing his starters really overwhelm the second unit of Denver and, make it a game. And you look at everything else, right? Like Utah had 15 turnovers compared to the Nuggets 11. Utah had 10 more possessions overall than Denver. Utah also had 11 more isolation plays than Denver and twice as many offensive rebounds, right? So you look at that and you kind of can paint a picture of what this game looked like if you didn't watch, 11 more isolation plays than Denver. That's to be expected because we mentioned that, you only have Donovan Mitchell being able to create for that offense.
Yeah, and on the other side, Denver's just full of guys shot guys that can make plays. They've got obviously Jamal Murray. I know Barton and Harris are out, but they've still got Jokic. Obviously, is one of the best playmaking centers in the league, if not the best.
Right.
He had another double-double. He played great. He almost hit that game-winning shot right over Gobert's outstretched hand. I mean, he almost blocked that, but that was a pretty exciting play for the end of the game, I think. When you consider most teams are going away from traditional center play, it was kind of nice to see those guys, go at it. That was an interesting thing. One thing I did want to touch on is the 6 more threes Denver made than Utah. I think that's where you miss Bogdanovich a lot. I think they they expected him to be that extra scoring option for them like he was with the Pacers, because he's obviously not there for his defense. And missing him and, like you said, Conley being gone, that's another veteran guard that can help initiate the offense. So it's understandable why they didn't make as many threes and why they had all those isolation plays. You've only got really one playmaking ball handler out there pretty much the entire game. The turnover difference wasn't huge, but 15 turnovers in a playoff game is kind of a lot.
Yeah, I mean, in a nip-tuck game like this one was, 4 turnovers, pretty much
the difference in a game
made that. And you spoke to the 6 3-pointer or the 6 more 3-pointers that Denver made compared to Utah. How about the fact that it came off of 6 fewer attempts than Utah? So you started seeing their offense being a little bit more efficient because they just have more guys who can, play make. You got guys that can pull up off the dribble. That's what we saw with Murray in overtime, right? Where he basically scored and assisted on every overtime point. Like, that's insane. And he finished overall with 36 points, 5 boards, and 9 assists. Would have loved to see him get one more assist, right, to pull in that double-double. Right. But, it was an incredible game. I think, for the opening playoff game in the bubble, you probably couldn't ask for, a better opening game, right? Because
no, I agree 100% with that.
And it was just neat, too, at the end of the game for Jamal Murray to be spying on Donovan Mitchell. They actually stay in the same hotel right now during the bubble. And so when he was going to his room, he was kind of like, almost like National Geographic style, like hiding in the bushes recording. Donovan Mitchell just sitting there chilling and saying, like, man, this dude just dropped 57 points on me. Look at him. He's incredible.
Right.
Like, it was just so cool.
Well, in the post-game interview, it's all I could talk about was Donovan Mitchell and his 57 points. He even said, I ain't got anything else to talk about in the interview. So, I mean.
And poor Mitchell, right? So before we move on to the next game, though, Austin, I want to get kind of like your main takeaways between this Denver-Utah matchup.
Well, I think you kind of hit on it from one of the first things you said. It was the typical, back and forth game between these two teams. I think as the series progresses, I just think it's going to go even further in Denver's favor if they get those two guys back. They're going to be even deeper. I just think as these playoffs go on, I think the every other day schedule and how compacted it is going to make a big difference for a lot of teams. Sure. And the Jazz are down to about a 7 or 8 guy rotation realistically right now. And, Denver shortened their rotation some, but they have so many guys that they can throw out there that can, really contribute. I think it's going to be hard for Utah to do much if they can't win on a 57-point game. When are they going to get a win? I think this might have been their best chance. But I have been wrong before, as I was about in a couple of my picks already. So you never know.
Yeah, I mean, you truly never do. Some of my takeaways, right, is that
Mm-hmm.
we touched on it a whole bunch, right? Like Utah doesn't have very many creators, therefore Mitchell has to be involved in literally everything. And when he
Mm-hmm.
sits, their offense is in trouble. And in a lot of ways, their defense too. Even though he's not as involved as he probably should be on the defensive end because of that offensive load, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
even him defensively is causing a lot of problems. You know, there were only three other teammates that Utah had that were in double figures, right? That was
Mm-hmm.
Gobert, Ingles, and Clarkson, and no one had 20 points or more. So there was no sidekick involved in this game really at all. It was him and maybe a couple Wonder Twins, but there was no true sidekick, right? And then if you look
Right.
at Denver, Denver had six people in double figures, and Jokic had over 20 points. He ended up finishing with 29. So whenever
Mm-hmm.
Murray couldn't get it going, Jokic was that reliable second option that you have to have in these playoffs.
Right. And it's very rare that anybody in the NBA can get it done by themselves, without a realistic second option like that. And I think that's kind of been Utah's downfall for more than just this season. They've had Gobert as kind of their second option, but he's not really an offensive threat like that.
No.
And they don't really have anybody else that they can give the ball to and say, hey, go get us a bucket when they need to. And that's a hard way to win in the playoffs.
Yeah, and Gobert, to his credit, he has gotten a lot better offensively. Like
Mm-hmm.
you see him, it's not just, he's not just a lob threat. There's been times where I've seen him drive and kind of go, a little up and under and
Mm-hmm.
around and finishing. So he's getting a little bit more fluid on the offensive end. But you're 100% right. By no means
Mm-hmm.
is he that reliable second scoring option. He
Right.
can't do it. He can't create a shot on his own, and that's
Right.
going to be a problem in the playoffs if that's your second best player.
Mhm. And you can't underestimate how much they are missing Bogdanovich. He was really good for the Pacers
Yes.
last year. He had multiple 30-point games in the playoffs last year, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember right. But he had a lot of good games, and he can really shoot, and he kind of opens things up a little bit. So that's a big loss for them for sure.
Yeah, wholeheartedly. Well, let's talk about the game one of the series that's actually continuing right now. I haven't even seen the score. Right now, Toronto's up 3. They just stole the ball with 6 seconds left, and Powell dunked it to make it a 5-point game with 5 seconds left. So it's a close game. The
Yeah.
first game was not so much
No.
that close of a game at all. And we're talking about the Toronto Raptors versus the Brooklyn basketball team is what I've affectionately referred to them as,
Right.
because they're far from the Nets, even though they've been incredibly feisty throughout the bubble. They played Monday as well. Toronto ended up winning that game 134 to 110. Van Vliet finished with 30 points, which was a playoff career high, and 11 assists for Toronto. TLC, Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot, that's French if you couldn't pick up on my accent there. He scored 29 points for the Brooklyn basketball team. Austin, what did you think of this game?
Well, it kind of went how I expected. I am, impressed with how hard the Nets play, or the Brooklyn basketball team. If you
Yes.
But at the end of the day, they're going to run out of bodies. I think they played about as well as I think they could on offense. Defensively, they're not going to really be up to par with these other teams. They're missing just so much of their starting rotation and just their rotation in general. You get to a certain point where everybody in the NBA, I think, can score on a given night, but not everybody can bring it every night, and that's why some guys start once and some guys don't. Karis LeVert, I think when he's out there, it feels like the entire team knows that he's going to be the one, running the offense and taking the shots. He's going to try to be doing most of it because he has to. So I think they keyed in on him well. He did have 15 assists, but only 15 points after, I think, almost every game in the bubble. He was over 20 before that, just about. Toronto won all but the third quarter. They were ahead almost the entire game. There were 12 total players in double figures, so the scoring was pretty, well spread out. Van Vliet, I think, is kind of making a star turn right before our eyes. He's probably going to get paid next year.
Oh, no doubt.
It's going to be really hard for Toronto to keep him unless because he's the type of guy, if he has a good playoff run, some team will offer him close to a max extension or max contract. And I don't know if Toronto wants to go that high or if they can, but I think they should do everything they can to try to keep him. But, Toronto made 22 threes. Brooklyn made 13, which is, a lot, but 22 is crazy. You can't give up 22 threes in a game.
Right.
And Toronto also had a huge free throw advantage, 21 more free throws. Obviously, to me, at least, that shows that they were more aggressive on offense. I think that's probably a big factor in why they got that win.
Yeah, and we talked about this with the game that we just spoke about with the Denver-Utah game, right? The Nets had 5 players in double figures. No one other than TLC scored over 20. But then for the Raptors, we just spoke about how great Van Vliet was. Well, Ibaka, coming off the bench, finished with 22 points. So you had that reliable second option. And it means a lot even having that off the bench because then you can rush your starters and still be able to compete against this, kind of injury-torn Brooklyn basketball team that we keep talking about, right? Toronto led most of the game, like you mentioned. They only had 2 more rebounds, but they did have the ball a lot longer, right? 12 more possessions overall. So that speaks to how, competitive they were. And we'll talk about that Milwaukee or Orlando game. Toronto did not come into this game thinking that they can just sleepwalk through this game. And that was, obviously kind of the main theme of the game was, not settling, trying to put a team that's not in your stratosphere out of their misery almost,
Right, and that's something we talked about on the last show about these teams wanting to get out of this first round as quick as they can, get down to business, get the job done, and move on, so you can have a couple days rest, or as many as you can get, because these games are just back to back to back. And there's something to be said about if Toronto goes out here and wins all 4. And other teams that are or like the Bucks and like the Lakers, if they struggle, that's an advantage for Toronto because they're going to be a little bit more rested at least.
That's right.
And so I think that's a big storyline too. And I think this year more than most years in the playoffs, depth is going to be a bigger aspect than normal because usually in the playoffs you see rotation shrink a lot. Correct. But in this game, both teams played quite a few guys. The Raptors kind of kept their normal rotation, and I mean the Nets played everybody. They didn't play everybody a lot of minutes, but they played like 13 guys. So they spread it out a little bit, but Brooklyn's got to shoot the ball better. They got to shoot a little bit better from 3. 31% from 3, and they've got to defend the 3-pointer a lot better. I think Toronto was exactly 50% from 3 for the game. That's you can't give up 22 threes and expect to win a game. So
well, not on that efficiency, right? And
right,
some of the big takeaways that I had, Toronto showed why they are the defending champions in this game. Even though they're without the reigning Finals MVP and an all-defensive talent, right? They're still the defending champions. They showed their depth and their versatility, which you spoke to. And Brooklyn performed about where I thought that they would, right? Like they showed heart. They're showing it in this game. They ended up losing 104-99 today, which a lot closer than this game that we're covering right now, right? So they show that they have heart. I think Jacques Vaughn is showcasing his coaching ability. I think Karis LeVert is showcasing his, trade marketability there, right? So he's a guy that you could end up seeing a team getting excited about getting based off of his bubble and playoff performance and be willing to part with a veteran and for a rebuild, right? So I think Brooklyn is playing about as good as they possibly can, and it's sometimes your best isn't anywhere close to somebody else's best, right? And I think that's what we're seeing here in this first and second game.
Yeah, I mean, other than maybe a couple other teams, I don't think anybody in these first games played at their best as much as Toronto did. They looked, poised. They looked like they're ready to make another deep run. All 5 starters were in double figures, 2 more guys off the bench. Like you said, Serge Ibaka, how much has his game changed over his career? When he first started with Oklahoma City, he was a rim protecting center basically, and now he can do everything. He can hit threes. He's a good free throw shooter. He's great defensively still, and he seems like he hasn't aged at all, and his game has just gotten better as he's gotten older.
Well, his game wasn't really predicated on athleticism that much, right? Like,
Right.
sure he was very athletic in his prime, right? But and he could block a lot of shots, but he was still very fundamentally sound on the defensive end. And he did show that he had some jump shooting ability in Oklahoma City. It just wasn't from deep,
Right.
And you're seeing how well he would show, you're seeing how good he can play when the games matter the most. And Toronto, you hear this all the time. A team coming off of a championship run, they're poised, they're really never shaken because they've been there, done that before. And I think you're starting to see that, with this Toronto team against the Brooklyn basketball team.
True, and I think they even still feel like they have something to prove too, even though they are the defending champs, because Kawhi's not there anymore, and everybody kind of gives him the lion's share of the credit for that championship. And I think this version of the Raptors is every bit as good. Obviously, their winning percentage is the best in franchise history. So
yeah, even better than last season. Right.
So they're doing something right. And I liked what you said about Karis LeVert and his possible, trade value, because once the Brooklyn Nets do get healthy, they're going to have a lot of guards and a lot of guys looking for minutes. And even with this performance, he still might be on the outside looking in, and he would probably be a good piece to move to try to get another, third guy with Durant and Kyrie. So I think that was a good point.
I could easily see the Washington Wizards being like, hey, we're not really going to do anything with Bradley Beal. We don't know what John Wall is going to look like. Let's re-sign Davis Bertans. We'll try to trade for a Karis LeVert and a Spencer Dinwiddie or a Jared Allen. Someone where you can make the salary match a little bit better, and send Bradley Beal up to Brooklyn. I have a sneaky suspicion that's going to be something that's discussed a lot this offseason.
Yeah. I've heard Brooklyn is a possible destination for Beal a lot. Actually, I see that on the internet pretty often. So you could be onto something there. Van Vliet's another guy I kind of wanted to talk about a little bit. I think personally a good fit for him in the offseason would be a team like Phoenix. If they could find a way to move Ricky Rubio, they could open up potentially enough cap space. They'd have almost $20 million if they were able to get out from his contract. And I think that could be enough to get Van Vliet away from Toronto.
And I mean, Van Vliet, he's so plug and play. He's literally any team that has the money to sign him, you probably feel like is going to be in the running to get. You could see a team like Miami, a team like even Milwaukee, right? If they could upgrade from Bledsoe to Van Vliet, how diverse and dynamic would that offense and defense be with someone like Van Vliet?
Agreed.
Yeah, right. So
one thing that I just saw that I didn't see when I was doing my research about this game is Toronto only missed one free throw, 33 for 34 from the line. That's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you kind of expect from them, right? Like they don't put out people that make a lot of mistakes. Like we talked about their turnovers. They didn't have very many in this game at all, right? And with that being said, they draw a lot of fouls. You look at guys like Kyle Lowry, Pascal Siakam, Marc Gasol, Norman Powell, OG Anunoby, like all these dudes can stroke the ball a little bit, right? So it's not really surprising when you put a lineup out there that consists of these guys that they're going to convert from the line.
Right. They're all veterans. They've all been, like you said, they've all been there before. So it's no surprise that this game went the way it did. Nice to see the Nets put up a little bit more of a fight today in their second game.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. And we can transition from there to a game that got a lot of, not that one, I'm sorry. I don't think I put it on here. But anyway, we'll go ahead and discuss it. It's Boston versus Philadelphia. What did you think about that game?
Well, it was probably the best game of the first day of games, in my opinion. It was pretty back and forth. Tatum, looked like a superstar. I've been on the show before saying I'm not his biggest fan. That's not to take anything away from him. He showed up when he needed to. 32 points, 13 rebounds. He had 3 blocks. He was great on both sides of the ball. Embiid, you can't say enough about him either. 26 and 16, 4 steals. Philly did have 5 players in double figures. Embiid was the only one to go over 20. Brown had 29. Tatum had 32. They're looking like a pretty formidable 1-2 punch. Philly actually had the lead in 2 of these quarters. Going into the fourth, they were ahead. After the first, they were ahead. the assist numbers were almost dead even, but Philadelphia did turn the ball over 11 more times than Boston, and that's in an 8-point game. That is more than enough to make the difference.
Yeah, especially when you consider the 7 of those turnovers were just steals, right? Like just terrific defense. And
Yep.
you talk about Embiid. I'm gonna kind of beat this point in, right? Because it's kind of controversial, right, or polarizing, I should say, when you talk about Brett Brown's coaching ability, right? You could look at this on one hand and say, at one point, in the stretch, it was a 4-point game, so obviously something that Brett Brown was doing was working, right? But then you look at kind of everything in its totality, and you have to feel like Brett Brown has at some point has to change his coaching philosophy because they're still, for whatever reason, they didn't get rid of Simmons. He's out with injury, and you have Joel Embiid, who's just a space eater in the paint, and they still want to put guys in the dunker spot, on the opposite block. They still want to kind of have a quick little dump off guy, which I don't understand. I don't know why you don't put a lineup out there that's close to what we saw with Dwight Howard in Orlando, right? Where you had him out there and a bunch of floor spacing around him. I don't know why Philadelphia is not doing this. 15 post-ups overall for Philadelphia in this game. That was my biggest takeaway, is that when you have Joel Embiid and he's putting up, 5 3-pointers, which every once in a while is okay, but when you have a matchup where your competition is, Daniil Tice, who is by all accounts a fine player, but he is not an Embiid stopper at all.
No.
And Enes Kanter is a bigger guy, but he's known more for his offense and rebounding than his defense. I don't, for the life of me, understand why there were only 15 posts. That should have been a quarter. 15 post-ups in one quarter.
Well, too, they have Horford too, which he's not a traditional post-up big man, but he can play in the post too. He can kind of do a little bit of everything on offense. Right. You would think that they would try to punish the smaller Boston team in the post,
especially with what happened in the first quarter. That first quarter should have been the entire game if you're Philadelphia.
Yeah, it's a little bit mind-boggling. He doesn't seem to have a good feel for like in-game changes and stuff. I feel like going into the game, their game plan seems like it's solid, but then as the game progresses and they have to make adjustments, it doesn't seem like it works out well for them. It kind of seems like he tends to go away from what works, which doesn't really make sense, or what you would think would work at least, or what was, like you said, what was working in the first quarter. And I think the mark of a good coach is not, okay, this is my system, I'm going to make these guys excellent in this system. It's building around what you have.
Exactly.
And I think he's just a little too set in what he thinks they should do, and not able to make changes on the fly like they need to. But 15 post-up possessions is a joke, if you ask me.
Yeah, and we talk about, the other parts of this too, right? Like Philly had 1 more assist, but 11 more turnovers. Boston had 14 more pick and roll possessions than Philadelphia, which I understand that Philly's not a pick and roll team. But if you had better spacing, which they could put out a lineup, and I know that this isn't a sexy lineup, but it would be effective in my eyes. If you put out a lineup to Shake Milton, Josh Richardson, Korkmaz, Harris, and Embiid, all of those guys can shoot to some extent, right? But with Embiid in the middle and those other 4 around him, Korkmaz is like their best shooter, and he's coming off the bench. Harris, off of a catch and shoot, is a 35 to 40% 3-point shooter. Shake Milton has been pretty good, and Josh Richardson has shown throughout his career that if he's catching the ball, not creating for himself, but if he's catching the ball, he's a capable shooter. I don't understand why they don't consider more pick and rolls or post-ups and passing out of the paint, right? And then Philadelphia even had 7 more rebounds than Boston, which, sure, like you expect that with the lineup that they have. But Boston only made 1 more 3-pointer than Philadelphia in this game. To me, that's kind of like a crimson mark for this game, because if you look at how the teams are constructed, you would assume that Boston would have even more. And that speaks to me of the defensive scheme that Philadelphia put out there as well. To Boston's credit, they took advantage of what was there in front of them.
Oh, I agree. I don't think by any means Boston played their best game. They didn't shoot the ball well, only 42%. 32% from three isn't terrible, but that wasn't an all-world Boston performance. And
Correct.
obviously the Gordon Hayward injury we haven't even talked about yet makes a difference there. But on one thing I want to ask you, what is Philadelphia's identity? Like, what do they do best? Because you would think,
Defense. It's
yeah.
just, I mean, defense is what they have been. The whole lineup, though, they went all in with this all big system.
Hmm.
Keeping Simmons and Embiid on the court together. Tybal is another guy that we didn't talk about at all. Tybal is phenomenal. He would be on my all rookie second team if I
Right.
had a vote. Right? They are heavily predicated on defense, and offensively, it doesn't make sense. They're just kind of jumbled in the middle, and that's what drives me crazy. Because as great as they are defensively, there is a path for them offensively to where they could have a strong identity, but they just don't seem to want to commit to one system or another.
Right. And I think a lot of it is like what we talked about. It's just kind of poor roster fits with some of these guys. And I just think having Embiid, Harris, and Horford on the court much together, just it hasn't seemed to work. And they play together a lot. All three of those guys had a lot of minutes.
Hmm.
They play like six guys over 35 minutes almost, and then hardly anybody else, which I know they're a little bit shorthanded. But they're, like we said before, a few years ago, their roster was just put together better. They're missing shooters on the outside, and like you said, I can't understand why they wouldn't almost try to look like the early 2000s Lakers teams. Obviously, not quite as
Right.
talented, but dump it into the post and then set up around the 3-point line. And when they have, because the Boston's going to have to double team Embiid if you just keep feeding him the ball
Have
in
to,
there,
because Tice,
and that's going to open
Smart,
stuff up.
Brown, Canner, none of those guys are shutting down Embiid if he's committed to doing it instead of standing on the dang 3-point line.
Right. Well, that's the same thing that's been going on for a long time. All these guys they fall in love with the three. They see Steph Curry and Damian Lillard out there hitting 35 footers, and they're like, I want to do that too.
I mean,
And
you could still do that, but like I feel like you need to assert yourself too, because even guys like Adebayo and Jokic, right? They're playmaking
Mhm.
big men, right? And they stand anywhere on the court and they could be successful, but they don't shy away from getting physical either. And when
Right.
you're Embiid, you're not that dynamic of a playmaking big. At your best, you're
Mhm.
probably the best center in the NBA, maybe second. Like,
Mhm.
boo-hoo, you're only second, right? Like,
Right.
you're still one of the first or second best centers in the NBA. And you could be physically dominant in the paint, especially against Boston. And that's why Boston was only able to get one game against them in the regular season.
Mhm. Yeah, and like you said, their only advantage against Boston is their size, and it doesn't make any sense why they don't use it. But I think you and I both picked Boston to come out of the East.
Hmm.
I'm going to stick to my guns. I'll stay with them. I'm not too excited about the Gordon Hayward injury. He's going to miss, I think, 4 weeks with a grade 3 ankle sprain.
Yeah, that's what they
Definitely
say. It could be sooner, and plus he was going to
Mhm.
miss time anyway due to birth of a child, much like Mike Conley, right? So
Right.
I don't know. I may have to change my Eastern Conference pick. I am not convinced still in Milwaukee. If I was to change my mind, I may just go guns a blazing and pick Miami out of the
Hey,
East. To be honest with you,
why not? We seems like the top seeds struggled a little bit, and this playoffs is different than any other we've ever seen before. We discount the idea that there's no fans in the stands, but some guys do feed off of that stuff. Whether it's
LeBron James.
yeah, I think that was his excuse, right?
He's not been shy about even before the playoffs in the
Mhm.
bubble. He said, hey, it's different without the fans, and
When
he feeds off of them.
I was listening to something on my way home from work today, and like one guy said, people don't take into account how much a part of the equation in sports in general fans are. And
Hmm.
the point they brought up was, imagine watching Game 7 of the NBA Finals and Michael Jordan hits a game-winning shot, and there's just nobody there to cheer.
Right.
And
There's people on a TV screen moving their
right?
hands around. Yeah.
It would be surreal, but it's definitely not something that should be overlooked. But I mean, if you're a basketball player, I mean, grew up playing basketball. I hardly ever played in front of a crowd, so I don't really
Right.
know how much of a difference that should make. But
And
if they
LeBron's
said
been playing in front of 20,000 people since he was, 15. So
right, so it sounds a little bit like an excuse, but I'll stick with Boston. Toronto looks really good. I'm nervous about them. I don't know who's going to knock them off, if anybody, but I'll stay
yeah,
with my pick.
I can't commit to Milwaukee, and
Me either.
Toronto just had a 5 point victory against a scrappy Nets team. I think, or Brooklyn basketball team. I
Hmm.
don't know. Miami is just looking really good in the bubble, and
Yeah.
they looked really good in their first game. We'll talk about them here in a little bit, but let's go ahead and talk about probably the most controversial game that we had between Monday and yesterday, Austin, and
Hmm.
that's the Clippers and the Dallas Mavericks.
Right. So the big story from there is obviously Kristaps Porzingis getting ejected. He had a second technical as part of a double tech with whichever Morris. I can't remember which one plays for
Marcus, I don't.
Marcus. Thank
It's
you.
hard for a lot of people, but yeah, Marcus
Thank you.
is the better twin. It gets more
Right.
playing time. Markeith is the usually the bench rider.
Hmm. But I think it was a little bit of a weak ejection call. I think that's a really tough call to give a guy that already has a technical foul. But you made a good point that that's obviously a mental lapse of judgment. You can't get wrapped up in that stuff in the
Playoff
playoffs.
basketball, man.
Mhm.
Like this is nothing new, and people want to make this seem like the Clippers are doing something unprecedented.
Hmm.
Robert Horry hip checking Steve Nash. We've seen Ron Artest and Matt Barnes get on to people. The Tayshaun Prince. We've
Hmm.
seen Ben Wallace, Dennis Rodman. We've seen dudes do some kind of hardcore stuff in the finals, and Draymond Green, right? We've seen guys all the time throughout NBA history do something to warrant getting an ejection or a technical
Hmm.
foul. And, you can say, oh, well, if this doesn't happen, the series changes. Well, yeah, this is just like a missed three or a blown free
Exactly.
throw shot. It's a part of the game,
Hmm.
and Clippers, they showed, their veteran savviness in this game. This is the first playoff appearance for Kristaps Porzingis and Luka Doncic, and they played like it.
Hmm. And it's a tale of two completely different, teams on how they go about winning games because Dallas has to rely on Luka and KP to do the majority of the scoring every night, whereas the Clippers can get it from anywhere. Kawhi had 29 and 12. Paul George had 27. Lou
Hmm.
Williams had 14, and that's low for him. Morris had
Yeah,
19.
which
They
was
had
big for him.
right. But that's the thing. They've got 6 or 7 guys that can do that. They've got guys that are hardly even playing right now that
Yeah, without
yeah,
Montrezl Harrell, by the way.
right. And when he comes back, it's going to be even deeper, which we already talked about. I think is going to be one of the biggest things these playoffs. The Mavs played hard regardless. They were in the
Yep.
game the whole time. Luka Doncic, 42 points. That's the most ever in a playoff debut. Honestly,
He's
there's
going to
nothing
be
he
getting
does
these LeBron James loves on his stats for the rest of the career because this is
right.
like he's first to do it at this age, first to do
Yeah.
it at this stadium, youngest to do this.
Hmm.
He's
You
going to
can't
start getting.
forget. You can't forget he's been doing this for 4 or 5 years in the pros now. So that makes a difference.
Yeah,
He's not a
yeah,
normal
counting
21-year
Europe.
old.
Yeah, counting Europe.
Which if when they talk about it, they say that's equal to NCAA college basketball or a little bit better.
Yeah,
So
probably
he's
better, right? Because it's pro and people have
right.
more chemistry. It's not a whole bunch of people saying, "Hey, I want to play in Europe for a year and then leave," right?
Yeah. But after halftime, the Clippers came out in the third quarter and turned it on defensively. Dallas only scored 13 points in the third quarter. For a team that scores as much as they do, that's a really impressive defensive effort. The big thing for me and the difference in this game again was turnovers. The
Yeah,
Mavericks had 10 more turnovers, 21-11. Luka had as many turnovers as the entire Clippers team. Obviously, that can't happen if they think they're gonna win a game in this series.
right. Yeah, and you look to rebounding. The Clippers, they're not a very strong rebounding team, but neither is Dallas. So I think that kind of bodes well if you look at a game like this, right? So you had I don't know, is this your guy, John Carr here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hey,
Yep.
John, appreciate you viewing there.
Yeah.
But
Thanks.
yeah, we have four more rebounds for the Clippers and the Mavericks, but doubled them on the offensive rebound, or more than doubled them with 11 to 5, right? And the Clippers had 10 more points in the paint. And this is something that I was kind of stressing about. Who does Kristaps Porzingis guard if he's not getting kicked out of the game, right? Because there's so many guys that the Clippers can put out there that makes him stand at the 3-point line, and then he's having to recover from the 3-point line all the way to the paint to guard a Paul George, a Lou Williams, or a Kawhi Leonard attack the basket or a mid-range shot. It's just schematically, it's just kind of hard for Dallas to put up with these small lineups that the Clippers can boast out there.
Right, and even with those small lineups, they don't get out rebounded. They don't give up anything on defense when they switch to those smaller lineups, and I think they'd be hard pressed to find a better strategy against this Mavs team than to try to keep the middle open, attack the rim. You know, we have talked a lot about how good the Clippers were and how good their defense was and this and that. But like you said, the Mavs could have won that game. It was a
very easily
close
could have won the game.
I just think they showed their youth and their inexperience. They were up by 15 in the first half, and it takes a while in the NBA to learn how to finish games and how to close out games.
Even with the coach's experience and championship background as Rick Carlisle, people forget that this is a young team, but they're very much a lot of their success is predicated on the fact that they have one of the best coaches in the NBA, schooling these young guys too.
Right, and that's why I think Dallas is, obviously they're on their way up. They've got a young roster that can kind of grow together. They're going to need to add a few guys in the offseason or make some moves defensively to kind of bolster their defense, I think. But obviously they're already one of the 2 or 3 best offensive teams in the NBA, and they've got their superstar. So I think things are looking up for them. It's just it's hard when one of your 2 stars gets kicked out of a game, and it's hard when you're playing against guys like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard in your first playoff game ever. Even though he did score 42 points, he looked a little bit like a guy that hasn't been on the playoff stage before.
Right, and they didn't have a reliable, Batman for him either. KP and Hardaway Jr. both had 18. No one eclipsed the 20-point mark. Curry only had 14, right? But you look at Paul George and Kawhi, almost both had 30, and Morris almost had 20. So when you talk about, who you can rely on in these situations, you have to have that capable second guy. And, we keep talking about this ad nauseum here on our show, right? As great as the Mavericks are, and as great as their offense are, and as great as the numbers look on paper for Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis, these two need to they still have an area where they have to get better at working together on the ball. KP cannot just be a standstill shooter with Luka Doncic out there. And yeah, go ahead.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree a lot with what you just said. And I think too, him not being able to be out there when Luka does come off the court and set, made a big difference. They need that. He does get more aggressive when when Luka's not on the court, and they obviously missed that. Luka pretty much had to initiate the entire offense, which he already does most of, but it would take a little bit of pressure off him if he could come out of the game and they still have somebody on the floor that can go out there and get a bucket for him. And like you said, he just didn't have that second option once Porzingis got ejected.
And again, I just want to touch on, people getting overreacted to the KP ejection. That second technical foul, he got in someone's face and exchanged words. We weren't on there. We don't know what they said. But he was not shy for standing up for, Luka Doncic. And I'm not knocking him at all for standing up for his guy, right? But you're too important to your team to have to do that, right? And you look at what Philadelphia did to Boston when Embiid didn't get a call that he liked. And Kemba Walker was coming up the court. He ran directly at him, and the refs didn't call that. So there is a little bit of referee inconsistency when it comes to these games. Maybe the Clippers are getting a little bit more favoritism from these referees because, the stakes of them winning a championship are a little bit higher. I don't know how much this weighs into the minds of referees. I don't care much to speculate into that, right? But you didn't see – my point for bringing this up is you didn't see Kemba Walker – charge him, or even a Tice or Cantor challenge Embiid either. He said, "Yep, this dude's frustrated. I'm gonna let him get this ticky tack foul called on him, and I'm gonna carry about my day and help my team get the victory," which he did do.
Right. And something that's always bothered me, at least for the last 6 or 7 years or so, that the NBA is not going to let two guys get into a full blown fist fight. They're going to break it up as quick as they can. So, this whole idea that, oh, I see my teammate out here that I need to go have his back, like, I don't think anybody's going to punch Luka Doncic in the face. I just don't see it happening anymore in the league today. Anybody knows if that happens, they're done for a long time. And
Yeah,
I
because
just
Luka
think,
Doncic is a little bit of a golden goose at this point. You know what I mean?
right. And I think this whole idea, oh, I've got to have my teammates back. I think you have your teammates back more by staying in the game and not getting
Being
yourself kicked
available.
out.
Yeah,
Right.
100%. All right. Well, I think that wraps up all the takes that we had for that game. Do you want to bring us into our next one?
Yeah, this one is the one I'm actually the most excited to talk about. We had Milwaukee and Orlando. Obviously, Orlando pulled off the upset, 122 to 110, something that you said you saw coming, and I obviously didn't. I picked Milwaukee to win in a sweep. I think they looked like a team, like you said, that thought they could, cruise through the first round. They let Orlando shoot the ball too well from three. They got nothing from what like Shaq calls the others, or the role players. They got 12 combined points from Pat Connaughton, Dante DiVincenzo, and the Lopez twins, and they've got to get more out of those guys. It just seemed like Giannis did his thing, but nobody else really showed up. Give credit to to Orlando. They played extremely well. They had 6 players in double figures. Nick Vucevic obviously went off, 35 points, 17 rebounds. He looked terrific.
With no free throw attempts in the game. Like that's a kind of a weird statistic to look at when you see how many points he had, and how great he was.
Often.
Yeah.
And it's surprising that he did as good as he did, because obviously Milwaukee's big advantage on defense is their size and their post interior defense with the Lopez twins and Giannis. They usually shut down inside scoring, so it was surprising to me to see him score that much. 64% from the free throw line for Milwaukee versus 94% for the Magic. That's that's another telling stat as well.
Yeah, it was an insane game, right? Because Giannis was still doing Giannis things. He got about his season average, right? 31, 17 rebounds, 7 assists. Middleton, very inefficient, 14 points. Eric Bledsoe. And see, this is when I talk about like how Miami matches up really well against Milwaukee, is that they have Bam Adebayo and even Jay Crowder for stints that they can put on a Giannis Antetokounmpo and make life harder. Not stop them, obviously, but make life harder, right? And then you have an Andre Iguodala, that you can put out there, and a Jimmy Butler, obviously, on a Chris Middleton. Jimmy could probably even cover Giannis some too, right? And then you have to put the Bucks offense in the hands of a guy like Eric Bledsoe or a George Hill or a Brook Lopez or Pat Connaughton, or DiVincenzo. These guys all went blank, and this is the inefficiency and the weakness in Milwaukee that you can see coming into this game. They're a great regular season team, much like the Atlanta Hawks of Budenholzer's previous stint. Look really good in the regular season, but have glaring weaknesses. Like if you care at all to look at a weakness on a team and not just say, oh, look at how great they're doing. And Giannis is my MVP pick, by the way. They have glaring weaknesses, and Orlando exposed them.
Right, and I think it starts with Chris Middleton. Obviously, he had a great year. He was an all-star. He shot the heck out of the ball, but if he goes cold, he's not your typical number 2 guy that can get in the post or attack the rim. Really, he's more of a jump shooter or
make others around him better. Like if LeBron's missing, he can still set up guys and things like that.
And Middleton's a little more one-dimensional, I think, on offense than a lot of those guys. And like you said, all those other players, they blanked. They got nothing out of them. And all season long, DiVincenzo, Pat Connaughton were bright spots for that second unit. And they really brought nothing. And Brook Lopez missed every 3 he took, which I can't remember the last time that happened.
Very uncharacteristic, yes.
And, like I don't want to keep beating this point into the ground, but Giannis can't do it by himself. They need somebody else to step up. They need to figure out a better way to defend the 3-point line. And something that isn't talked about as much in the NBA today as it used to be, when the term you live by the three, you die by the three, because so many teams shoot so many more threes than they used to.
Correct.
But Milwaukee's offense seems like, if Giannis is going to get his, but if the other guys aren't hitting threes, they don't really have something else they can go to. And that's kind of how I've always felt about Mike Budenholzer's teams. When he had the number 1 seed in Atlanta that one year, it seemed a little bit fluky. They didn't really have a legitimate superstar. They had Horford, who was good, but they kind of just, when the playoffs came around, it seems like that style of play doesn't seem to work as well for some reason.
Well, yeah, and you look at everything else that happened too, right? Like the Magic made 16 threes, and the key thing to note about Milwaukee is that they give up threes in order to protect the rim. So whenever they're not protecting the rim well, and it seems like a Nick Vucevic is killing them on the interior, which he was, then you're taking away even more of what little three-point defense you have. Right. And you got guys like Augustine and Fournier and Clark too, right? Gary Clark out of nowhere had a really nice game, right?
Right.
He's actually had a nice couple of games if you go back and watch. The Magic have some guys out there that can hit threes. And to be very clear, right? My takeaways from this game is, we shouldn't overreact to Orlando winning. Like, look at what Orlando did to Toronto last season, right? They were the very same team awoke the NBA champions. If you if you care to think about things like that, I'm not saying that Milwaukee is going to win. I just got done saying that I don't think that they will. Right. But there is a world that we live in that they very well could have just made Giannis ticked off and made the rest of the Bucks ticked off, and you may not see another game like this from Orlando. But it was still very encouraging if you're an Orlando fan or player,
I
to have
agree.
this type of performance.
I think, obviously getting a 1-0 lead in the series, I don't think a whole lot of people expected that. So you've got to be, feeling good if you're Orlando. And it's not like they had some out of this world performance from some unknown player. You can kind of expect Vucevic to have. He's not going to score 35 every night, but he's been a solid player for them all year. And it's not like they got a 57-point game from Donovan Mitchell and it was just a fluke. They played well, but on the other side, Giannis could go for 45 points every game the rest of the playoffs, and it wouldn't the rest of the series, and it wouldn't surprise me. He's good enough that at least in this series, he could probably will them to a series win by himself. So I wouldn't be too worried if you're a Milwaukee fan. You're not going to get that bad a performance from all 4 of those guys that we talked about every night like that. Somebody's going to show up.
Obviously, just to highlight on a couple of those guys real quick, Austin, right, for my takeaways. Giannis, his free throw percentage was horrendous. He accounted for 5 of the 10 missed free throws that the Bucks did miss, right? Bledsoe only shot 20% from deep. Brook Lopez was blank from outside, and Connaughton was 25%, right? So that supporting cast does need to step up more in order for Milwaukee to succeed.
I agree, and I think they will. Like I said, all year they've been, some of the bright spots on that team, and they're not just going to disappear for the whole series or the whole playoffs. So I think Milwaukee, at least for this round, will be all right, but it's going to be their next matchups after this that I think will be a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. And moving on to a series that we just a few days back saw them play in a seeding game, right, where you had Indiana and Miami square off, and it was very, very funny to see how Jimmy Butler was able to shake up T.J. Warren in that game. T.J. bounced back, everybody. He bounced back. He had a decent game against Miami on this go round. But Miami still ended up winning. They beat him by 12 points, 113 to 101. Jimmy Butler had 28 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. Bam finished with a double-double of 17, 10, 6 assists, and 3 blocks. Dragic was, he hit 14 of his 24 in the fourth quarter. And then for the Pacers, you had T.J. Warren and Malcolm Brogdon both combining for 22 points. Austin, what did you think of this series or this first game?
Well, it's just kind of the same old story with Indiana and Miami. Ever since even when LeBron James and Dwayne Wade were in Miami, it's kind of always been the Pacers just can't get over the hump against them. No matter how close they come, it seems like Miami makes the plays down the stretch that they need to make. Jimmy Butler comes down and hits two big pull-up threes towards the end of the game, something that's not really a big part of his game. And like he said, I just wanted to make the right plays, and in those two instances, a pull-up three was the right play. And it looks good when you make them, but he doesn't always do that. But he makes a lot of big plays for that team down the stretch. They're getting a lot of good production from young guys. Tyler Hero had another good game, and the Pacers, the injury bug just keeps coming back to bite them. Oladipo got hurt again. He got poked in the eye 8 minutes into the game. Obviously that's going to make a big difference. He was starting to look like he was rounding into form in those last few bubble games.
Yep.
And so, they're already without Lamb. They're already without Sabonis. And it seems like Miami's got their number. And it seems like it's been that way for almost 7 or 8 years. So,
yeah. And this game was, the Heat won or outscored, the Pacers in the majority of the game, right? Mm-hmm. The Pacers out-rebounded the Heat. Turnovers weren't really significant, but I will say that it was in Miami's favor, right? Mm-hmm. Miami made 4 shots from the field on only 5 more attempts and only 1 more free throw on 3 fewer attempts. So Miami was the more efficient team from a lot of areas, right? Mm-hmm. Except that they made 3 more threes on 11 more attempts. So Miami was more of a volume 3-point shooting team, and should come to no surprise because they were one of, if not the league leaders through the majority of the season in 3-pointers made an attempt. And they just have a phenomenal defense. The way that Bam Adebayo plays, he's such a fluid player. He doesn't play like he's a center at all.
No, he doesn't.
He's just phenomenal. I will say, though, for the Pacers, it's not like they played terrible in this game. If you look at their efficiency numbers, their turnovers, they're very much a Nate McMillan team. You know what I mean? They're not going to take too many risks or anything like that. On the contrary, I mentioned those 11 more 3-point attempts to get 3 more threes for Miami. That's kind of an Erik Spoelstra specialty, right? Like he's going to send a barrage out there, and if he falls on it, then he falls on it.
Right, and to me, it doesn't make sense why the Pacers don't shoot more threes. They're one of the most efficient 3-point shooting teams in the league. They've got 3 guys on their bench: Holiday, McDermott, and I can't remember the third one. I just read this the other day, but they're 3 of the 3.
Aaron Holiday?
Yeah. Those 3 guys are in the top 10 in 3-point percentage in the NBA this year. And McDermott's been on fire since the bubble started, and I don't understand why the Pacers don't try to take more threes, because I think that would help them, especially in this series. And what you said about Bam, Turner can't guard him. I don't know who on the Pacers team could. I think that's where they miss Sabonis a lot. I don't
even think Sabonis.
No, but he's another big body that can, gum things up in the middle, and he would help. He is, he was an all-star this year, and it's like I keep saying, it's the same old song and dance for the Pacers. They're a very solid team. They're well coached. They don't do anything really terrible. It just seems like Miami always makes the plays they need to make whenever these two teams play.
Yeah, and like I said, both teams played, pretty good basketball. Miami was obviously the more aggressive team on both ends. What really hurt, the Pacers was the inefficiency of Brogdon. We mentioned his numbers in the scoring column, right? But, he only sported a 33%, field goal percentage, only 16% from deep, and he accounted for 3 of the very few turnovers that the Pacers had, right? So it comes down to, missing Oladipo. Is Brogdon a traditional point guard, or is he more of an off-ball guard, right? We saw that with Milwaukee last season, where he was more off-ball, and, it looked promising for Indiana to kind of unlock some of his playmaking ability, but how much do you want to trade off there? And then too, another thing, just real quick, Austin, is you look at the play calling differences, right? Miami ran 37 pick and rolls plays compared to Indiana's 14. It's a pretty big disparity there.
Right, 37 pick and rolls is a lot, and Indiana's got to do something defensively to try to get them away from that. And the pick and roll is the oldest play in the book, and it's still super effective even today. if you run it right, it is hard to defend. And I think Bam is a big part of that. Him rolling to the rim or being able to step out. That's a big advantage when you've got a big man that can give you more options like that. Um, but yeah, 37-14 is a crazy difference as far as pick and roll offense. And it makes me wonder, like, Indiana doesn't shoot a lot of threes. They don't do a lot of pick and rolls. They don't play Turner in the post. What is their offensive identity? And I don't really know what that is too much. It seems like in the bubble it kind of got glossed over because TJ Warren went off game after game. Mm-hmm. But if he's not out there giving you 30 points and Oladipo gets hurt like he did, it's going to be tough to rely on Brogdon and those guys to pick up that much slack.
Yeah, you see a lot of ball movement, right, with this team. They pass it around the perimeter a lot, and I think they try to look for an advantage, right, to where someone could slip in and make a play in the middle of the lane. But when you put Miami is such a good defensive team, though, that like they can switch on almost anything that Indiana could throw at them as far as pick and roll goes. Bam could match up well against Brogdon. He can match up well against, Oladipo. He can match up well against Aaron Holiday or TJ McConnell. He can guard all of those guys. And then if you're putting, for example, TJ Warren's guy out there, Jimmy Butler and, Jay Crowder and Andre Iguodala are all very capable switching on the defensive end too. So, you probably have to target a guy like a Tyler Hero or a Duncan Robinson, but that weak side help for Miami is also just phenomenal. So it's just hard. They're going up against a really good defensive team and one of the best 3-point teams in the NBA, and that's unfortunately the game that the NBA is for Indiana. The strengths that Miami have are basically encompass the entire identity of the NBA.
Right, and the Pacers aren't going to win this series without Oladipo's playmaking, without his shot creation. They're not going to win this series without Warren stepping up a little bit more than he did, and they're really going to miss Jeremy Lamb, I think, in that aspect, because he's just another guy that can get his own shot, and against a team like Miami, that's really hard to do. And if you've got a guy, and if you've got a guy that can do it, you need him out there, and I think they're missing those guys a lot. I don't have a whole lot else to say about this series. It's frustrating being from Indiana. I'm not a huge Pacers fan, but it's just you hear a lot about them being local, and it's just kind of been the same thing for 7 or 8 years. They just are so close, but they just can't quite get over that hump. And it's been that way for quite a while.
I could imagine. Unfortunately, I don't really have an NBA team to call my own based off of where I live. But we can move on to a game that you and I both said out of the Western Conference that this was probably going to be the more fun of the matchups that we had with Houston and Oklahoma City. This is also one of the series where you and I had different, viewpoints on how the series would go. It's still very early, but Houston ended up winning 123-108. What do you take away from this game?
Well, this is one that I actually was able to sit and watch the entire game from the opening minute all the way to the end. One of the few that I was able to watch the whole game. So what I saw a lot of is a lot of trickery really in Houston's offense. Houston is constantly running stuff on the weak side of the court, and every possession it seems like they've got 3 to 4 different actions going on, and almost none of it really matters to the actual play. If you watched over and over, it's just all this off the ball movement and all this extra stuff, and the defense turns their head for a second and boom, James Harden gets to the rim. It's almost all a misdirection to get him a better chance to attack or kick out for threes. And then once they do kick it out, they move the ball around the perimeter so fast. They were just, boom, 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 2-3 quick passes, open three, over and over again. And, obviously they shot extremely well. They made, I think, 23s. They shot almost 50% from the field. They only turned the ball over 7 times. They were extremely efficient for them on offense.
Yeah, and Harden finished with 37 points and 11 rebounds. He shot 54% from the field, 46% from deep, which if you're a Houston Rocket fan and you're a James Harden guy, anytime that he can hit close to 50% from deep, you know that he's cooking, right? Because
Hmm.
that's not 2 attempts, that's not 3 attempts. He's lobbing them up there. Um,
Right.
and you talk about the other guys that we had too. One thing that has kind of been a repetitive theme, like who are your Robins right on this team? Who do you have that can get you 20? And Houston, Harden had 2 Robins show up. He had Gordon and Green. Both of them had 21 and 22 points respectively. They shot 38% overall as a team. They shot 37% from three, 89% from the free throw line, 48% from the field. They had 6 more points in the paint. And you talk about this small ball lineup of Houston, and everyone has this, preconception that, oh, it's all their points are gonna come from outside, and they're gonna get beat up in the middle. Au contraire, right? Like,
Right.
they're also putting up these threes, yes, but they're also getting more points in the paint. Obviously, bigger driving lanes when you have everyone standing, outside on the perimeter, and you got to put guys like Gallinari or Steven Adams in the mix. Adams is a great interior defender, but he's not really like a one-on-one lockup guy. And when you have a guy like Jeff Green who could bring the ball up and play make from the center position for Houston, that's not a good look for Steven Adams defensively.
And it's something I touched on, and I think you and I have both talked about a lot. That in Houston just creates a lot of matchup problems for anybody in the NBA with this small ball lineup. At one point in this game, Nerlens Noel had 4 personal fouls and 4 minutes played.
Yes.
He's lost out there on defense, and he's a pretty good defensive player. Usually, he just doesn't have anybody he can really match up against. There, like him and Steven Adams aren't comfortable 25 feet from the rim. And it showed a lot. I would like to see, Oklahoma City try to go to Adams a little bit more on the offensive end, see if they can't, exploit that. But also, I don't think you're going to see Shea Gilgeous-Alexander and Dennis Schroeder both shoot 25% from the field very often. I think those
Probably
guys
not. Probably not.
yeah, I think those guys are both a little bit, more efficient in that, and I think they'll bounce back. So I don't think Oklahoma City's in too much trouble from this one loss because Houston looked like they were hitting on all cylinders, and a couple plays here and there, and this could have been a much closer game. They were in control for almost the entire game. It wasn't really too up in the air, but it's not like Oklahoma City played their best basketball and still got beat. So.
Yeah, and you talk about Chris Paul had 20 points, 10 rebounds, and 9 assists, but he had 4 turnovers, right? So that's kind of one of the trade-offs. If your usage rate is up, your turnover percentage is probably going to go up too.
Right.
It was just crazy to me. If you look at the play calling too, it's not like Houston's play calling was that different from Oklahoma City's. They only had 2 more isolation plays than Oklahoma City, only 1 more pick and roll possession than Oklahoma City. And again, you think the the way that you look in this game, or the way that you perceive Houston's offense to look in your head, is completely different than it is on the court. It's very much the same as what Oklahoma City did. Now, Oklahoma City only ran 9 total post-up plays. Only 1 of them was double teamed on. So it was 7 more than Houston. So when you talk about Steven Adams in the middle, he's not really an offensive guy. Like, he's capable, but he's more of a rebounder and a defensive-minded guy. He's slightly better offensively than Rudy Gobert, right? But it's not like you have a playmaking big in the middle. He's very sound. It blows my mind that even still they only posted up a total of 9 times in this game for Oklahoma City when you have this small ball lineup.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. I understand Oklahoma City's game isn't, they're not a post-up offense. They're not a big, dominant inside offensive team like that. But you'd think with a lineup of Houston, whose biggest guy is 6'8", that they would at least try to exploit that, and make an adjustment there. And a lot of that offense in the post too comes from Harden driving in. But I'm done listening to people say that this Rockets team is a one-man team where they just stand around and watch James Harden do everything. Sure, he has the ball a lot, but watching that game, it actually reminded me a lot of those Spurs teams from like the 2012, 2013, where they just throw the ball around the perimeter as fast as they can, and their
Yep.
ball movement was incredible. And it looks great when they're all hitting shots. And it can look really ugly when they're not. But Ben McLemore's another guy that's played really well for them.
Yep.
Who
Corner threes.
and it's a hot commodity in the NBA. There's these days, if you can put 4 or 5 guys out there that can hit threes all game long, the math just it's hard to keep up when they're throwing up 52 threes a game. That's a lot.
Yeah, 100%. And my big takeaway is that Houston made 23s but led in points in the paint. They defended the paint well with their aggressive style of defense. I touched on it earlier. Lineups where, Jeff Green bringing the ball up is a bad look for Oklahoma City because they just don't have the defenders that can stop that, right?
Right.
Chris Paul is obviously the best perimeter defender on that team, but he's also the initiator of the offense. So you're having him spend a lot of energy to try to cover a James Harden, and then maybe if Russell Westbrook comes back, maybe even a Russell Westbrook, right? And then still be able to facilitate and give that same amount of attention to the offensive end. It's really tough, especially at his age, right? And if you look at the way Eric Gordon played today, if he plays like that, even like 80% of what he played today, Houston's going to be in good hands when Westbrook comes back, because Gordon had not played like this for most of the season. And Austin, real quick, you're going to have to excuse me. I'm going to step around, but you can continue to talk. I'm going to have my headphones in.
All good. Eric Gordon obviously showed up. Jeff Green was a plus 28 when he was on the court. But I think that bodes well for Oklahoma City too. I don't think you're going to see those guys put up those numbers every game of this series. I don't think it's something that they can keep doing for an entire series. And, Ben McLemore, 4 of 7 from 3, Jeff Green, 3 of 7, Eric Gordon, 2 for 6, James Harden was almost 50% from 3. We've seen lots of games with this Houston team where those guys go cold, and it definitely could happen. The one bright spot that I saw for Oklahoma City was Danilo Gallinari. He did have 29 points. But that we talk about that crucial fourth quarter, lineup that they run with those 3 guards out there. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Dennis Schroeder both played awful. And it was a 15-point game, and the Rockets were in control most of the game. But like I said, it's not like Oklahoma City set the world on fire and just got beat by a better team. I think they ran into a Houston team that has been hot from 3. And if they stay that way, they're a really hard team to beat. But, we've seen this year in and year out for the last few years. They eventually come up against a team that does defend the 3 well, or they just, aren't hitting threes, and they have to be able to find that next option.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. And I will say too, though, that speaking to Oklahoma City's clutch, lineup that they have, Houston is probably one of the more adept teams to be able to match that,
Right.
shot for shot or possession for possession, right? Because of the totality of their perimeter options that they have on that end.
We've mentioned a lot about how I thought that Oklahoma City matches up well with Houston on defense, but we didn't really talk about it the other way. And like you said, that clutch lineup they have is pretty heavily predicated on guard play, and Houston can defend guard play pretty well. It is a hard matchup for Oklahoma City in that aspect.
And they can put pressure on all those guys on the other end of the ball too, right? Because if you have Westbrook, Gordon, and Harden out there, who Chris Paul can't guard all 3 of them. Schroeder has stepped up a little bit defensively, but he's still not going to be able to check those guys. Same for SGA. SGA is just not ready right now to be that, lockdown defender yet. He'll probably get there. I like SGA a lot, but
Me too.
It's a lot to ask for a sophomore year,
And something else that was kind of telling was for Houston as a team that obviously leads the NBA in isolation plays, and they didn't really have a whole lot of ISO plays in this game. They only had 2 more than the Thunder, which was surprising to me considering how much Harden does have the ball in his hands. And like I said, it reminded me a lot of those old Spurs teams, maybe not as deep and, but they just moved the ball so well, and it was beautiful to watch from my aspect. And that was my biggest takeaway was Harden didn't have to do everything. Like he initiates all the offense, but he had guys that he could throw it out to and trust to make those shots. And it does look ugly when they don't make them, but they've got so many guys this year that seem like they can just put the next guy up, can come out there and hit 3 threes, in the next couple of minutes, and all of a sudden there they go. That's hard to guard.
It is. And speaking of hard to guard, let's talk about this next game, right? Where we had the LA Lakers against the Portland Trailblazers.
Yep.
What the other end of the number one seed losing this game. And, this is another one where we probably, disagreed a little bit, right? Where, I could see Portland giving LA a couple of games. I still don't think that they're going to beat LA, but this is not a team to take lightly. And, things coming into this game, right? If you look at this soberingly, right? Like if you didn't think, okay, LeBron James is just going to be LeBron James because he always is, and he's going to activate playoff mode, and you're going to see them just flip a switch. They didn't do that this game. They did not flip a switch, and you can say that it's a one-off, which I'm more inclined to agree with than not. But I'm also a little bit skeptical of it at the same time, because this was a concern throughout the entire bubble for the Los Angeles Lakers. Their offense was stale. It was stagnant. If LeBron James and Anthony Davis weren't at their absolute very best, they were not in games at all. Mm-hmm. And you saw that coming in, where you saw Portland playing playoff basketball from the very beginning of the bubble. All their star players were getting star minutes. They were, in very close games throughout the entire bubble. Like, they conditioned themselves specifically for a game like what we saw, where Portland ended up winning, 100-93. Austin, how did you evaluate this game?
Well, first off, the final score to me was surprising. Not that the Lakers only scored 93 points, but that Portland didn't really set the world on fire either. I expected if Portland was going to win a couple games in this series, it was going to be a high-scoring game, and it was just they were going to have to outscore the Lakers just because they aren't very good defensively, Portland. But some of my bigger takeaways was LeBron had his numbers, AD played well, and they still couldn't win this game. And what would be a sports talk show without a little bit of overreaction? And I am a little worried, more than I thought I would be, just because I expected them to turn it on. I kind of thought they were just cruising through the bubble, trying to get their rhythm, and none of the other guys showed up yet again. And I thought they would. They're going to have to find some kind of offensive spark off the bench. Kuzma did a little bit, but they need some of these guards that they have to step up. I don't know how you feel about this, but I think Kentavious Caldwell-Pope's minutes need to be cut big time. I think they should try.
If you're going off of previous, if you're going specifically off this game, absolutely. Even if you're the totality of the season, he should not be putting up this many minutes.
I mean, he got 30 minutes, and R. Smith never saw the court, and Dion Waiters played 2 or 3 minutes. Why even bring those guys in if you're not even going to give them a chance? At the very least, they give you some shooting. The Lakers shot 15% from 3. That's awful. And, the Blazers, on comparison, were 38% from 3, which is a good number. LeBron,
it's solid, yeah.
LeBron didn't shoot the ball too well. 57% from the free throw line, 1 of 5 from 3. The Lakers have to find some shooting if they're gonna be able to go all the way to the finals, like I think they will this year. So I am a little worried after this. Who is going to pick up that slack on offense? And I do think they have the answer on their roster. I just don't know why Vogel isn't playing those other Waiters and Smith more than he has.
Well, I'll speak to that point, and then instead of just blaming the Lakers, I'm going to give the Blazers a little bit more love than we're giving here on the show. To speak to your point about KCP and Danny Green and all these other guys, as much as they were a dud on offense, wholeheartedly agree, they were a dud on offense. Would the game be as close with Dion Waiters on defense and J.R. Smith on defense? Do you think what's your take on that? Do you think that the game is that close defensively without KCP and Danny Green?
That's a good point. Danny Green, I think, still deserves his minutes just because defensively he is pretty locked down. KCP's a decent defender. I don't know. You've got to get more out of a guy that gets 30 minutes. 0 for 9 from the field, 1
And how
point.
about Caruso too? You didn't hate on him yet. How about Caruso?
Yeah, Caruso, he's kind of a fan favorite. I think you'll see if once Rondo comes back, I think you'll see his minutes go down some. I
He's
do like him.
Dellavedova to me all over again. You
Yeah,
see this
he,
with LeBron James
mhm.
teams where you get this dude who's kind of a feisty competitor. Like he's not a great defender, right? But they say, oh, we kind of like him because he's kind of like the team's mascot. So we'll say he's a feisty competitive defender, and he can do a little bit of everything, but nothing like super well.
Right. He doesn't give you much on offense. And that's, I think, what this team is missing the most. They need
Hmm.
they need a little bit more firepower out there. And I've never been the biggest fan of Caruso. I see why they play him. His plus minuses are always one of the better ones on the team. I think his plus minus last night again was really good, but he doesn't really score.
But you know
And
what happens with plus minuses, right? It
Mhm.
depends on the lineup that you have around you. When
Right.
you're playing with LeBron and
Exactly.
AD in the
And
regular season, your plus minus is probably going to be pretty good.
Exactly, and I think that's a big part of it. He makes exciting plays here and there. I think a lot of it is the fact that he's a smaller, balding, unathletic-looking player, and he can
And
he
he's
can get
white.
up and dunk it, right. He can get up there and dunk it pretty well. He does make some exciting plays here and there. But I like what you said about kind of like the team mascot. He almost seems kind of like their little brother.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
like they just, they could have picked somebody else to be on the team, but, he's family and they got to walk home together when the game's done. So,
right. Well, what
he's
about
just nice.
That's funny. What about another thing that I saw is, the Lakers could have signed Carmelo Anthony in the offseason, and they went with Jared Dudley instead. That was another
Boy,
big mistake.
and the only time Jared Dudley's in the game is when the Lakers have the game in hand. That's the only
Right. He doesn't
time
play
you
at all.
see. Yeah, it's over when Dudley's lacing him up and
And
taking off the
another guy
warm-ups.
I think I would like to see more play from is Quinn Cook too. He put up some
He
good
put up
numbers.
he had a great bubble game.
Yeah, and then when he was with the
Golden
Warriors for those
State,
few
yeah.
years, he's a knockdown 3-point shooter most of the time. For a team that doesn't really have any of those right now.
And you're paying him $3 million with
Mhm.
a pretty high luxury bill coming your way. Yeah, if you're paying someone $3 million, you probably better give them a look.
Right. Why is I know in last night's game he didn't really play, but in the bubble, why is Taylor Horton Tucker getting 25 minutes a night? And these guys that you could actually be relying on in the playoffs didn't really see run like that. And I
Probably
don't
just
know.
because he was a draft pick, and there was a lot
Yeah.
of hype around him, and they wanted to see what they
Yeah.
had in a game that
Frank,
meant
I don't know.
something.
I'm not too high on Vogel's lineups or his rotation. It just seems weird to me. I
And
think.
this is exactly what I was worried about with the Los Angeles Lakers. You
Mhm.
see this all the time. And again, I'm gonna prelude this conversation that I love LeBron James. This is the best LeBron James, the
Mhm.
most fun I've ever had. But you see this on every single team. His team lost, right? The blame, he's bulletproof, right? Because if you look at the numbers that he had, he put up 23, 17, and 16. On paper, that's phenomenal, right? So obviously he deserves no blame at all, right? And so you look at, your third option, and the history repeating itself again, right?
Mhm.
Kyle Kuzma only finished with 14 points. You got to have more out of your third option.
Mhm.
Danny Green only had 10. You got to have more out of it. And obviously they do deserve criticism, right? And now we're talking about their coach not being good enough. And this is history repeating itself again, right? Even as great a head coach as Eric Spoelstra is now, when a lot of the credit that he got for winning was because, it's easy to coach when you have a guy like LeBron, Wade, and
No,
Bosh,
it's
right?
not.
It's not. It's really not. And you've seen guys get fired for less, right? So
Mhm.
you see this all the time on a LeBron James team, and he is such a good player. It happens. It be like this sometime, as the kids
Right.
say, right, Austin? It be like
Yep.
this sometime.
Well,
But
LeBron's never going to not get his numbers. You can say that about
well,
him.
listen to this. I think it's low hanging fruit, right, to go after these dudes. But let's talk about the guys that you're giving big money to, right, and that you gave up a lot of capital with, right? It's low hanging fruit, right, to go after KCP, Green, and Kuzma in my eyes. Those are the glaring weaknesses, right? But how
Right.
about LeBron James only shot 57% from the free throw line, 4 out of 7. He shot 20% from deep, 1 of 5, and led the team with 4 turnovers. How about this? Anthony Davis was only 33% from the field, 0 from 5 from deep, missed 5 free throws, was only 70% from the line overall. If you're going to talk about the Lakers, and this was at one point, it was within, I think, like 4 points. And actually, the Lakers had a lead at one point. They were up by 6 in the fourth quarter. And here in a second, I'm going to shift and just give credit to the Blazers instead of blaming everything on the Lakers, right?
Right.
You look at this, right? 54-7 from the free throw line and 1 of 5 from deep, combined with 0 of 5 from deep and 5 missed free throws. Do you think that wins them this game?
Definitely not, obviously. LeBron can't miss those free throws down the stretch. AD needs to be in the post a little bit more aggressive. In 2018, when the Pelicans swept the Trailblazers, he was extremely dominant. He was the focal point of the offense. He was in the post a lot. He was attacking the rim more. Everybody likes to shoot threes and they like to spread the court, but he needs to get inside. He needs to attack the rim, get to the free throw line a little bit more, try to get Nurkic in foul trouble or something. I don't know, but
that's not going to win them the game, though. And
no.
Like I said, it's low hanging fruit, right? And you look at the usage rates, like how many points are you expecting from Kyle Kuzma and Danny Green other than 14 and 10? Like maybe 17 and 15? Like, okay, like they didn't get you 7 more points combined, right? But you look at LeBron James shot 1 of 5 from deep. LeBron and AD combined for 1 of 10 from the 3-point line.
Can't have that. They're not going to win like that.
They're not going to win like that, man.
I don't think.
And if it's not Portland today, then it's Houston tomorrow. And if it's not Houston tomorrow, it's the Clippers the day after that. You can't put up those numbers from your star players and just be like, okay, Frank Vogel isn't doing like. And again, like everybody else deserves a little bit of blame, but let's not pretend like AD and LeBron had like these outstanding games that just got squelched. Like they didn't have a Donovan Mitchell performance,
Exactly. They didn't set the world on fire. They weren't hitting shots. They didn't get beat at their best by a better team by any stretch of the imagination.
No, not at all. And so, all right, so instead of doing the popular thing and just criticizing the Lakers for losing, right, let's talk about the Blazers and what they did, right? The Blazers did a good job of forcing tough shots. They held the Lakers to 15% from deep and 35% overall from the field. And their free throw percentage, doesn't have a lot to do with the Blazers defense, but that didn't help them either. The Blazers, they actually out-rebounded the Lakers, right? I think that you put this set up that they out-rebounded them 55-50. And I think, too, we talked about this a little bit, that against the Blazers, I don't think that you can run Anthony Davis as a 5 because Nurkic is too talented and just too big. He's like almost 300 pounds, and he's taller than Anthony Davis, and he's stronger than Anthony Davis. He's not as talented, but he's talented enough to be on the court with him. And you actually saw Portland get away with running a lineup that consisted of Whiteside and Nurkic out on the court together.
It's going to work against the Lakers. I don't know if they get past them, if they could do that to anybody else in the NBA, but the Lakers are about the one team that they can get away with that, I think.
And not only that, but then they got the backcourt to give the Lakers fits, and you saw it in this game, right? And I'm not getting – the reason I'm kind of banging on this is because, like, everyone who thought that the Lakers were just going to waltz through this Portland Trailblazers team, they have the roster, they have the talent at specific positions that they can put up a couple of games against them, probably not win a series, but can put up some games against them. And then we talked about this too, right? The way that they played before they entered the playoffs. The Lakers were flat offensively. Portland had been playing playoff basketball before the playoffs even started.
Yeah, and you saw it in the Eastern Conference too. Milwaukee didn't really have anything to play for, and they came out flat in the first game of the playoffs too. And I think there's something to be said about that. I think, maybe more than we're giving it credit to. Maybe guys feed off of fans more than we think. I don't know.
That's what LeBron James is saying.
Right. So maybe there is some truth to that. It seems a little bit like an excuse. But yeah, I'm not trying to take anything away from what Portland did at all. They
Oh,
definitely
not you specifically when
right.
I'm speaking to that, but like everyone is blaming. If you turn on a sports channel
Mhm.
right now, everyone's like, "What did the Lakers do wrong?"
Well, that's the sexy thing to talk about. It's Los Angeles. It's a huge media market. It's LeBron James. It's Anthony Davis. It's never going to be what how good the other team was to beat them. It's always going to be, you know, what more does LeBron need to win, or what can he do better, or who else does he need on his team, or does he need a different coach? Like you said, it's been his whole career. That's been the story about him, and
History is repeating itself
and I think
already.
that's his. He has a lot to do with that because he's always been the type of guy that's had a lot of input on on the roster on his team, and he's always been the guy that even when Teron Lue was there in Cleveland and they won a title together. Most people, I even said it the other day, LeBron was the coach of that team basically, and Lou kind of stood there and held a clipboard, and
Hmm.
I just it's always gonna the narrative is always gonna be about LeBron until he's done, and that's how it always is. But Portland did a lot of things well. They defended really well, and what you were saying about Danny Green and Kuzma, how much more do you expect from them because of their usage rate? I don't know. It's so much that you expect them to give you a lot more points. It's just somebody needs to hit big shots, and nobody on that team is doing it right now.
Well, and we mentioned too that LeBron and AD combined from 1 to 10 from deep. So like, you have 10 3-point shots that you're taking away from the supporting cast that you're clamoring about, right? Not you, right? But like that people are clamoring about, right? You limited shots. Now you have to make this one shot that you're gonna get. You know what I mean? Like you're not giving them a long
Right. It's
enough leash.
a hard. It's a very hard skill to have. It's like in baseball, being a good pinch hitter. It's hard to come onto the court and just get one or two shots, and you're expected to make them.
Yeah, and the Lakers they don't have. And this is the thing that I was saying. Like, if you're LA, do you miss Avery Bradley and Rajon Rondo yet?
Oh, definitely, for sure. At least on the defensive end, if nothing less. Rondo actually was shooting the ball a little bit better this year for the Lakers than he has throughout
Avery
his
Bradley
career.
too. Avery
Avery
Bradley has
Bradley
been
was
on a lot
one
of
of the,
playoff teams where he's
yep,
been
he's
a.
got a lot of experience. He's a great defender. They're definitely missing those guys. And I think you can give up a little bit of KCP's defense and a little bit of Danny Green's defense if they're only scored 93 points. They've scored under 100 3 or 4 times since the season's restarted. They're the only team that has more than one game under 100.
Right.
They've got to try something to get some scoring in the lineup. So one game, give it a chance. Get Waiters in there some more. Get J.R. Smith in there some more. Even take some minutes away from Caruso and let those guys handle the ball some. LeBron's gonna be your primary ball
Exactly.
handler, so you don't really need to take a ton of minutes away from Green and KCP to give those guys some more run or some run in general. But I just like I said, Vogel's lineups just kind of confuse me a little bit. They didn't get a whole lot from Dwight Howard either, who's been a big time energy guy for them this year. And it's I'm doing it again, just constantly talking about what the Lakers did wrong, but I feel like wholeheartedly the Lakers lost that game more so than Portland.
Well, I mean, too, if you look at the halftime, like I said it going into the half, like this game is this tight, and Portland only made one field goal in the second quarter. Like they were getting to the line a lot and converting at the line, but it's not like the Lakers were the only one that had like bad stretches of offense. Like the
Right.
Blazers made it a game. You know what I mean? And to speak to your point about Waiters and Smith coming in the game, not only does maybe that takes away a little bit from your defense, right? But you're putting more pressure on Portland's defense doing that because both of these guys are shot creators. So you can't really hide Damian Lillard on a Caruso or a CJ McCollum on a KCP in the corner, right? And then having Gary Trent guard the most versatile playmaker on the team. Like you're making Portland's defensive decision making a little bit more harder because you can't really hide their weaker defensive players on guys that are just going to be spotted up in the corner.
Right. And another thing too, I think the Lakers need to focus on is attacking the basket a little bit more. Portland has a pretty thin rotation right now. Zach Collins was out again, and I think they only played 8 guys, and they got away with some decent minutes from Wendy and Gabriel. And like you said, they had Whiteside and Nurkic on the court at the same time.
Yeah.
The Lakers have got to try to get those guys in foul trouble. get to the line a little bit more. Obviously, they need to make their free throws when they get to the line. They haven't been a good free throw shooting team all year, and that's
Yeah.
something that's worried me a lot too. It just seems like they're fast, they're big, they're athletic, but the name of the game is shooting, and they're sorely lacking in that aspect right now.
Yeah, and I just got done talking about how we can't take too much away from the Blazers. I said coming into this that I think that this is a 6 game series, and the Lakers probably take two, and then Portland get one, and then LA finishes them off, maybe something along those lines. But this is exactly the type of matchup that I was telling you that don't be surprised if Portland gives them a couple games because they have the roster. They have been playing playoff basketball for weeks now, and the Lakers are coming in flat. Nurkic is talented enough to where you can't necessarily have AD at the 5, or he's just going to get beat up all game long. And,
Right.
you know, I hate to say it, but he's also injury prone, right? So you don't necessarily want to put him on a physical presence in the paint, right?
True.
With a guy that is creative offensively, a guy that is a great rebounder, can pass the ball, and he's got a lot of weight on him, 60 pounds or more on him, and he's just as tall. So it's not a good look for LA to have to go up against a team where they have a competent, center who's good enough to be on the floor at the same time as Anthony Davis, because then you have to put, JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard in the game more than you probably would like.
Right. And all this we're saying that all these guys didn't show up, and how bad the Lakers looked, and how bad of a matchup Portland is for them. At the end of the day, their defense is going to keep them in all these games.
Yep.
A couple shots here and there, and the Lakers won that game. They were ahead, down the stretch. It was close the whole fourth quarter. It's not like, another instance like with Houston and Oklahoma City. It's not like they played their best ball and got beat. And this could be a whole lot to do about nothing if they come out the next couple games and look like the team that beat Milwaukee and the Clippers back to back before the season shut down. Where's that?
They have to play their athletic front court to the best of their capability and have Kuzma, LeBron, and AD as your front court.
I agree.
And probably Waiters and a JR or whoever you want to. Danny Green.
I think he'll help. I don't know how much he'll be available for this series, but
yeah. So if you have a lineup out there that Major League consists of, Waiters, Green, LeBron, Kuzma and Anthony Davis, and you just run, like you're going to make the backcourt for Portland a little bit more, compromised defensively speaking, and the front court isn't going to be able to keep up with Kuzma, LeBron, and AD. They just can't.
Right. And how long can Portland keep this up? Like you said, they've been playing high level, intense games with a lot on the line basically since the season restarted. And how long can an 8-man rotation keep up playing that well? And two, the one thing that does kind of worry me is I thought if Portland won a game or two, it would be like 130 to 120 point game, not 100 to 93. I thought that was much more in the Lakers' wheelhouse if they could keep the scoring down.
Yeah.
But 93 points isn't going to win you a whole lot of basketball games in today's NBA.
Yeah, and I just think that the Blazers, they're not an older team. Like they're not very old. They're not super young either, right? Like they have the cats to be able to pull off like long extended periods of, playoff minute basketball. Lillard
Right.
and McCollum can run all day long. We see Gary Trent Jr. is a young guy. Nurkic has put up like 30, 40-minute games already. So they got guys, they got the horses to be able to make it a good show.
Right. And it's weird to think about in terms of actual life, considering like talking about the Lakers and like LeBron James is older and how, it takes a wear and tear on their body. He's only 5 years older than you and me. He's not an old man by any stretch of the imagination. But, you see him out there with the gray flecks in his beard and
salt and pepper gang.
Right. It's all the media talks about is how old man LeBron in his 17th year, like he's 35,
That's
crazy.
I mean,
like,
we're talking about we're not
be
talking about
impressive.
old for the earth though. We're talking about basketball.
Right. It shouldn't be impressive that guys that are 29, 30 years old can go out there every day and play basketball. Especially professional athletes at the top of their sport.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. Well, Austin, I think that this has been a great show, man. I've enjoyed covering playoff basketball with you. We'll be back recording on Sunday, putting out an episode on
Hmm.
Monday, and we'll be covering games from today, which is Wednesday, all the way through the weekend. So it'll probably be an even longer show. We might have to kind of hedge back a little bit on the details and,
Right.
speculations and whatnot. But, we're looking forward to, one, just watching basketball. It's just been
Hmm.
awesome. And then discussing it with you, Austin, for all of our viewers and listeners. I couldn't think of anything else better to do with, almost 2 hours of my time, right?
Right. Yeah, I love doing this. I'm excited to do it every time we have a show. We've only done, I think this is our, what, fourth show together.
This is episode number 4, yeah.
Yep. And, it already, like you said the other day, it feels like we've been doing this for a while. We've got a lot of basketball to cover. This is a busy time for us for sure.
Wholeheartedly agree. Well, for people, like I said, watching or listening now or later, you guys have been awesome. We've been your hosts. Been a pleasure to be here with you guys today. Austin, say something nice to the people.
Hey, everybody that listens in every episode, or if this is your first time, thanks for listening. I hope you listen again. I appreciate the love. We are trying to do as good a work as we can. Steven and I are both really passionate about this. I'm working on an article that I hope to have done today. It's going to be everybody on our site's picks for who they think is going to make it to the finals, and a little bit about why. So we've got some really interesting stuff coming there. But yeah, just thanks for taking time out of your day to listen to us.
Yeah, and if you want to follow us on social media, you can hit us up on Twitter at BTG NBA Pod. If you want to hit us up on Instagram, same thing,
Oh,
BTG
there I
NBA.
am.
Almost BTG NBA Pod. You can follow the podcast at Breaking the Game. It's available wherever you get your podcast from. Hit us up on allaspectsports.com for some great written work and, obviously podcasts like this one as well. We got some stuff in the works. We're probably going to make a major announcement here within the coming days. We'll keep the details on that pretty hush hush for right now. But things are on the move, and we're very excited to just keep being able to produce content, whether it's podcasts or articles as well. Austin, you look like you got something you want to say?
I was just going to say that's a professional tease if I've ever heard one right there.
Okay, well, like I said, we'll keep it hush hush. But
Right.
yeah, we just it's an honor to give you guys the type of time that we do. We love doing it. So just we appreciate the consistent viewership and the consistent listenership and
And my wife appreciates it too because I don't have to talk to her about it all day long like I used to. So
well, you don't get to, right? Not that you have to, but you get to. It's yeah,
exactly.
it's a nice thing. Oh, and hey, if you want to email us, you can email us at breakingthegamepodcast@gmail.com, and we'll discuss any dialogue that you guys want to have here on the show.
Yeah.
Austin, tell the folks goodbye, man.
Hey guys, have a great day. Thanks for listening. Go out and watch these games. We've had a lot of good games today. Enjoy sports while you can because we didn't have it for quite a while. So
That's right, and we've been the Breaking the Game podcast. You guys have been awesome. Much love, everybody.
have a good one.